This is video journal number 3 for EDUU 676, Autism Spectrum Disorders Programming and Strategies 1 for Brandman University. And this week's video journal is really a conclusion of the APERS scale that was begun in week 2. And in this particular journal, I will be addressing 5 areas. One of those being social competence, second, personal independence and competence, third, functional behavior, family involvement, fourth, and then teaming, fifth. And as I looked over the completed APERS, starting with social dependence. Now, as sort of a reminder, this was an inclusion classroom at the primary grade level. And in terms of the student with ASD, I noticed that in the room there was a high degree of reinforcement of social competence. I mean, this one student had several opportunities throughout the observation to interact with typically developing peers, and the teacher utilized multiple activities and materials to encourage social development and responses from that student. And I noted that she used both individual, well, let me not say individual, but paired versus group activities, which I thought was very good. And I'm just looking down the social competence portion of the scale. And I think an area of need is the systematic instruction. In this room, there are no paraprofessionals, and I know that that's a different section of this scale. But in terms of the gen ed teacher utilizing specific evidence-based practices, I did not see evidence of that. So I think that's an area that needs improvement. And looking at this section of the APERS, it talks about social stories, peer-mediated instruction. I didn't really see anything like that, so I just checked that as an area of something that's not necessarily consistent, but they do need to work more on that. A second part of the social competence aspect of this scale was networking activities for the student with his peers. I think that's an area that's kind of a work in progress for this particular classroom also. The second portion of the scale, personal independence and competence, I thought that this was a real strength. Several strategies were used during the classroom activities. I noted that this teacher was really big on organization, so she used lots of calendars, lots of there's almost like an aspect of the AVID program where organization of materials in student binders was used, and I thought that was also very good. So that was a relative strength. And then looking at the last section under personal independence and competence, that's an area of improvement. I did not really see very many, I guess, interactions where self-management was taking place. I mean, there were a few, but not very many during the observations, even though peers were supportive of the student. In the third area, functional behavior, now I sort of put an asterisk by this one because this student is high functioning. So very rarely are there interfering behaviors that take place in the classroom. So I checked it as uh, a work in progress for this group. I was kind of not really sure about how to grade that or score that. But from what I learned from the support staff up front, they do functional behavior assessments, and there's quite a bit of communication that goes on between team members, including the teacher. So that's a positive. But again, I just checked that as a work in progress. And then the last one under this functional behavior section, at least one team member uses an intervention plan when those things occur. But again, that happens very rarely, according to the support staff that I spoke with. And then the next section is family involvement. And I think for this particular site, and I mean that globally in terms of the school, not just the local site within it, meaning the classroom. I think for this particular school, the communication part relative to family involvement is excellent. They seem to be on top of everything that goes on, and I think they should be. So for this particular section, families are more often than not a huge part of the IEP process, of just, any of the kind of daily activities that go on with this particular student, that's communicated. So they are a part of that loop. And from what I was told, that communication is ongoing. And I don't believe that it's something that's done as needed. So the second section of that, the family involvement, team members provide information important to and individualized for families. I think talking with the data control person at the school, this is another strength for them. They, communicate to parents in a way that is, for lack of a better term, concrete, so that the things that are being explained are understood by the family members. And then in the last section, teaming, this particular school, again, was very strong in this area. Meetings, again, everything is highly scheduled, highly organized. I didn't really see any indicators that would suggest that this is an area of growth. But collaboration was great. Even with me, a stranger, coming in just to observe, they seem like a very strong knit unit. And the last thing I'll say about this, in a gen ed classroom, at this particular one, there were no paraprofessionals used. So I just made a note of that at the very end. But overall, I think this was a very positive learning experience for me, but also one in which I, witnessed an environment with a gen ed teacher who, while there's some areas of growth, overall, very positive, a very good teacher. So with that, that's it. We're done.